Even though I love 120 frames per second and I use it much, I started to appreciate the beauty of 60 frames per second. I mean, sometimes I can't even tell the difference. Not always. What's up guys, Frullani here and welcome back to a new video. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. If not, just whatever. Just hit the like button, smash it right now. And don't forget to check the links in the description to see all my gear for photos and videos and stuff. Photos and videos. Okay, what are we talking about today? We're talking about slow motion, 120 frames per second and 60 frames per second. But before we start, I have a test for you. When you see a video, can you tell if it's 120 frames per second or 60? Come on. When you watch a movie, you say, oh, wait a second, this is not 120, is it? You get the idea anyways. I'm gonna show you a few very short clips, some of which were shot in 60 frames per second and some others 120 frames per second. Well, just watch it. So are you 100% sure you got them all right? Let's check. So, how many did you get right? And how many did you get wrong? That was pretty easy, or not. Anyway, why did I want to talk about slow motion 120 against 60 frames per second? Well, because first of all, I've always loved 120 frames per second because the slow motion you get with that frame rate is so buttery smooth. Everything like so stable and awesome. But what if you don't have 120 frames per second in your camera? Or, for example, like in the case of the EOS R, it does have 120 frames per second, but in 720p. I believe it's a very good quality 720p. It looks good, but many of you just don't want to shoot 720. No, God forbid. So, if you shoot at 60 frames per second and then you slow it down in post, can you get the same awesome buttery smooth footage? Well, even though there are differences, because 120 is double, 60, 120, that's math. We can't change that. So of course, 60 frames per second can't be as slow and smooth like 120. But does it look good or not? Well, I went here outside with my wife and kid and we took a walk. And I shot some sequences and I put them together into two different sequences. One shot completely in 120 frames per second and the other completely in 60 frames per second, and then I slowed it down in post and conform it to 24 frames per second for the timeline. Just check them out.
Strikes by my window, hits my chest right in the morning, like a warning. Could have slept here for days. I felt your heartbeat, felt your mouth breathe, but it's not kiss, still burning. Didn't know I missed this passion in life. Now I'm addicted somehow. Let me tell you what is up with your smile? It's impossible, not melting, irresistible. When I look through your eyes, not even sky's the limit. I used to be satisfied, get over this surface. Now I just can't get enough. You make me feel good like no other. I just want everyone to see what I've discovered. And when I'm with you, I go higher. You lift me up, now I can see so much further. You're on the horizon. You're on the
Okay, so what do you think about it? Leave a comment down below, hit the like button if you haven't already. Now back to the frame rates. What are the main differences when it comes to shooting in 120 frames per second or 60? So when you shoot 120 frames per second, everything is easier when you're shooting. Straight away looks smoother, kind of like with more stabilization, even though it's just an impression. And also, I say it's easier because when you have to film something, your subject, you just take the camera and do this. And then it becomes so slow and smooth because 120 frames per second, when you put it and conform it to 24 frames per second on the timeline, it gets so slow and again, smooth, awesome. It's a little bit more difficult or hard when you're shooting 60 frames per second because when you shoot 120, you can do this and you get the most buttery, smooth, awesome slow motion. With 60 frames per second, you have to move like... Well, you get the idea. But also there are cons when shooting 120 frames per second. Of course, it depends on your camera. If you shoot with either a Canon 90D or a Canon M50 or a Canon EOS R in 120, you don't have autofocus at all. And it's not really easy to keep your subject in focus so the entire time when you're filming. But I mean, it's doable. It's just a little bit more difficult. In 60 frames per second, you do have the dual pixel autofocus and it's awesome, so much better. I'm by no means saying that when you shoot 60 frames per second and then slow it down in post, it's gonna look exactly like 120. Just in one case maybe, if you're filming your subject and nothing else moves in frame, nothing is moving, yeah, you move the camera slowly, your subject is either still or you tell them to move slowly, it can look just like 120. But if there's something else in frame moving, even when you slow it down in post, you can slow it down till a certain point. The people or things in frame will not move as slow as they would in 120. The question is, you've seen what I shot in 120 and 60 frames per second. What do you think about it? Do you think that 120 frames per second is essential for you? Something really important for you that you will never shoot 60 frames per second? Or do you think that 60 frames per second is awesome and you can't even tell the difference? Even though there are differences, as I mentioned. Again, leave a comment down below, just let me know. And check the links in the description to see all my gear and stuff for photos and videos. Before you go, make sure you hit the like button. And if you want, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram, where I started to post more consistently. And if you enjoyed this video, again, hit the like button, smash it right now, subscribe if you ain't already, and I will see you guys in the next video.